In the early morning hours of December 16th, 2000, a loving and caring husband and father would go duck hunting, only to never be seen again. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jerry Michael Williams. Viewer discretion is advised. By the way, that little creepy laugh in my intro is just for October, just for the Halloween season. So that's why I have it on there. But on to the story. Jerry Michael Williams was born on October 16th, 1969, and he lived his life in Florida. At the time of this particular story, they are living in the Tallahassee area, and it also takes place in Jackson County. Jerry would actually go by his middle name, so he would either go by Michael or Mike, I guess just depending. So for the purpose of this video, we'll call him Mike, since that's my name. Mike's dad was a Greyhound bus driver, his mother worked in a daycare, and he would also have a sibling, a brother. And his brother's name was Nick. Now, the parents would work very diligently their entire lives, sometimes working multiple jobs, like odd jobs, and their goal was to eventually get both of their sons into a good college. They were both very super loving parents. They took really good care of the two boys, and you know, Mike and Nick grew up in an incredibly loving household. Mike would go to North Florida Christian High School, as would his brother, and then he would graduate from there. But while he was in high school, he was a football player. He was also an academic. He was, always got passing grades, and he did awesome in school. Mike would also pick up duck hunting while he was in high school, and it just became like this passion of his, something he just liked to do whenever he had some off time. Also, while in high school, he would meet his future wife, Denise Morrell, and the two of them had a very good friend that they spent a lot of time with. His name was Brian Winchester. After he graduated high school, Mike would go on to study at Florida State University. He studied political science and urban planning, and towards the end of his college years, he would actually get hired on as a house appraiser. Mike would call himself, quote, the hardest working man I've ever met. He would go on to, make an annual amount of about $200,000. So he was doing very well for himself. In 1994, he would actually end up marrying Denise. By 1999, they had a baby girl, and her name was Ansley. Mike was an adoring father. He absolutely loved his daughter with every fiber of his being. She would be a daddy's girl, of course. Just unfortunately, she never really truly got to know him. So, like I said earlier, Mike took up the hobby of duck hunting, and typically he would have like this routine of he would go duck hunting a couple mornings a week, then go into work. Then he would, go home, and then when everyone was sort of settled in, he would sometimes go back to work or just stay at home. But duck hunting was always kind of like the thing that always helped clear his mind in the morning to help kind of get his day going. This had become routine for Mike, and everyone in his life knew that. Now, in late 2000, Mike and Denise would go to their high school friend, Brian Winchester. He now sold life insurance policies. Uh-oh, that dreaded saying. But they would end up purchasing a life insurance policy in Mike's name. This was somewheres around $1 million. Eesh, that's not looking good. This little trio had stayed friends since high school, and Mike and Brian were considered best friends. And Brian and Denise always seemed to be really close as well. December 16th, 2000 was a sunny, calm, quiet morning, just like every other morning. And allegedly, according to Denise, Mike would get up right before dawn that morning, and he would get dressed, he would have breakfast, and he would leave the house in his Ford Bronco, which he would also have his boat, towing just behind him. So he was going duck hunting, according to Denise. And Mike would then take off for Lake Seminole. Lake Seminole is about 50 miles west of Tallahassee, and it bordered on the Georgia-Florida border. Now, that exact same night, or that day in general, was Mike and Denise's wedding anniversary. It was their 6th anniversary, and the two of them had plans to go out to dinner and celebrate that night. And Mike and Denise both seemed really, really excited to celebrate. But that celebration never got to occur. Several hours later, after Mike had left, Denise hadn't seen him. She hadn't heard from him. He was usually always home before, mid-afternoon, and it had now been well past that, and Mike still wasn't home. He was expected home that afternoon after he was going duck hunting. And then into the early evening, still nothing from Mike. So at this point, Denise is becoming very concerned. So she calls her own father, and then she calls Brian Winchester, kind of panicking, saying, I don't know where he is. He hasn't come home. Brian, who was very familiar with where Mike went duck hunting always, said, I'll drive out there and I will see if I can locate him. So Brian got into his vehicle and he drove out to Lake Seminole, and he pulled up to an area where he thought Mike would usually be, and he found Mike's car, his Ford Bronco. It was parked next to this muddy kind of sloped embankment type thing. But he didn't see Mike's boat at the time, and he did not see Mike. Brian called out for Mike first, just to see if maybe he was within earshot, but nothing. So it gets to a point where then he's not finding Mike, he's not hearing from Mike. Something feels off, something feels wrong. So he tells Denise, and then they would decide, all right, let's go to the authorities because something is wrong. The initial thought was Mike probably fell off his boat somehow and possibly got stuck on something underneath the water and drowned. So this is when the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission got involved. They got involved first before the police or the sheriff's office. And several hours later, they would actually end up finding Mike's boat. It was just sort of floating in in the reeds, I guess, of the lake. So it was sort of in a position where it was stuck. The engine wasn't running. And when they looked inside the boat, again, Mike was nowhere to be found. In the boat, however, they found Mike's hunting shotgun. And it was actually still in its case. So it looked like he never even opened it, and he certainly never even fired it. So now it is presumed that Mike must have fallen in and drowned, so this now becomes a search and rescue mission. They need to go find where Mike Williams is. The very next day after Mike had gone missing, there was this massive storm that blew in, so they actually had to cancel the search temporarily, and this kind of concerned them because this may potentially get rid of any additional, evidence, or possibly may take his body, if it is in the water, and move it somewhere else, whatever the case may be. But they had no choice. They had to stop searching because the storm was that bad. And then by the next day, the storm had let up, and they were able to continue searching again. While the storm was going on, however, they were able to sort of give a cursory examination of the boat and also his vehicle. It was not... because this was not treated as a criminal investigation, they didn't search the vehicle very thoroughly. They did just a basic check. They found nothing out of the ordinary. They found no signs of a struggle within the car or within the boat. Nothing to indicate that anything of foul play would have happened. They would even announce that they do not believe any foul play was involved, that this was just a tragic accident. Now, they weren't saying that conclusively. They were just speculating that that is the likely scenario. So, after the storm passed up, they would then begin to search a 10-acre grid where Mike's boat was found and where they think he would have been hunting. So that's where they focused their search on. They got on their own boats and they began to comb the waters. and search for anything or anyone that they could. After a very long and exhaustive search, they came up with nothing. And this was a very detailed search, and this went on for weeks. But they eventually had to just call off the search because they weren't finding anything. Now, in the area where Mike's boat was found, it was sort of like in this sea of tree stumps that were kind of just sort of poking out of the water. So the conclusion they came to is that his boat must have crashed into one of those logs that he just didn't see, and then he flipped off the boat, and they speculated that he had his waders on, and so when he fell off the boat, the waders then filled up quickly with water, which would sink him down to the bottom, and then they presumed that he drowned. The Wildlife Commission, at the same time, is communicating and working with the local sheriff's department, and so they communicate this theory to them, and then the sheriff's department kind of comes out with their own, grim announcement, sort of. They said that, the likelihood is that Mike is in the water, he drowned, and within a week or so, his body should float up to the surface because when decomposition takes effect and the gases build up, his body will naturally float to the surface. But after a week, that never happened. A body never surfaced anywhere on the lake. And then officially the search was considered called off and done in February of 2001. And Denise was not argumentative at all. She was like, okay, you guys did your best. That's fine. I agree. Yeah, call off the search. She never pressured anyone to no, please, you need to find my husband. She never did anything like that. She never called anyone out. She just said, okay, that's cool. It's a little weird, a little kind of a red flag, right? I would be concerned if my husband was out there. I'd want him to be found. No questions asked. One of the strange aspects to this is, at this point, Mike is presumed dead, right? Now, in Lake Seminole, over the many years, there have been 80 reported deaths at the lake, and these were typically related to drowning. Mike Williams was the only one to have never been found. One out of the 80 never to be discovered. That's kind of odd. I'm not saying it's impossible that, just this one could have happened, but it's very strange regardless. So, when that came out, this is when the alligators surfaced, if you will. Obviously, Florida is known for its alligators, and the lake itself is no stranger to alligators. So, the theory they would come up with was, well, since he hasn't been found, alligators must have gotten to his body and just sort of ripped him to pieces, and brought his body parts to whatever hole these alligators may go back to and live in, which they would never be able to find, people would never be able to find. But other, you think that when this happens that, other body parts would be kind of get loose and float up to the water, and nothing like that was ever found. No arms or legs or anything. No part of him was ever found. They said, what if he possibly fell in the water? He got tangled up in some of the underwater shrubbery and reeds and whatnot, and then an alligator got him, possibly while he was alive. Possible, but again, it just seemed kind of an odd suggestion, I guess. Denise, again, was just like, okay, yeah, that's probably what happened, so let's just move on. She had set up a memorial for him. They had a service, but she never spoke to media. She never answered questions. She never did anything like that. She just appeared to be very cold and very uncaring and unflinched by all of this. And then, several months later, about 6.5, 7 months later, in June of 2001, someone will report finding waders floating on the surface of the lake. So when the Wildlife Commission got involved, they decided to do a search of that area. And so when they went kind of below the water, they found more. They found a flashlight in good working condition, and they found a jacket. In that jacket was a hunting license. The hunting license belonged to Jerry Michael Williams. It even had his signature and everything on it. These clothing items were Mike's. But Mike was nowhere to be found. The waders and the jackets were very thoroughly investigated, and one thing to note was that there was not a single bite or tooth mark on any of the items of clothing. Which is odd, because if he was wearing all of this when he was then attacked by gators, you would expect some rippage of clothing, tooth marks, anything, but nothing like that. Denise was told about this finding, and she was like, well, okay. She gave zero fucks. She just was like, he's dead then. We knew this, he's dead. So, literally within a week of them finding the waders and the jacket, she had Mike declared legally dead. I mean, I guess everyone grieves differently, but her behavior just seems like major red flag to me. And then, within like a week of that, she files the claim to get the life insurance policy that they had taken out just very shortly before Mike disappeared. In total, she got about $1.5 to $1.75 million. Yes, she got it. She was rewarded the money. Oh, and remember that friend of theirs, Brian Winchester? Well, turns out he would quickly start dating Denise publicly, and then 5 years later, they got married. And Brian moved into Mike's house. He then started to help take care of Mike's daughter, and he began to help spend Mike's life insurance policy money with Denise. Totally nothing sus going on there, right? Brian even sold them the life insurance policy, with Denise initiating that whole deal. Meanwhile, Mike's mother was still holding out hope that maybe, possibly, her son survived, that her son is alive out there somewhere. But Denise, she wouldn't really speak to Mike's mom at all. She basically just ignored her. But Mike's mom, who was pushing and pushing and pushing, managed to actually get the case reopened in 2004, the missing persons case. The authorities would actually agree with his mom, saying that everything about this seems very suspicious, at the very least. So they did a little kind of like investigation, right? So if Mike's boat was running, if the motor was running when he crashed into this log and flipped over, experts on these particular boats said that the motor wouldn't stop running. It would continue to run. And considered where the boat was found, sort of like away from the shore by a little bit, and sort of floating in the middle of the lake, it would have taken up some gas as well. The tank of the boat was full, completely full. So if he had crashed, fell over, and the boat was still running for God knows how long, there would not be a full gas tank, but there was. It's almost as if the boat was never actually running that day. Mike's Bronco was found near a muddy kind of embankment. It was not an official boat launch. So they presumed, because his vehicle was backed up, they presumed that Mike backed up the vehicle to this muddy slope to lower his boat into the water. The problem there is that Mike was extremely familiar with this area. He went hunting there all the time. And he knew of all of the cement, the built boat launches, and he always used them. He would never just use this muddy embankment to lower the boat into the water. It just seems very odd. Something to authorities, it feels off, something feels wrong, something suspicious. It's just really kind of bubbling to the surface here. They also discovered the fact that Mike almost always hunted with a person, a partner, with him. But this particular morning, nobody was with him. Not a single person went hunting with him. None of his typical hunting buddies would even say, he didn't even call us. Like, we never planned anything, so no. And then they looked into this alligator issue, this alligator theory. They would find out through experts that alligators rarely fed in cold weather. And this was December. It was cold weather. The waters were as cold as 46 degrees that time of year. And that day that they were searching, it was about 46 degrees as the coldest. Alligators don't feed in that cold of water. They just don't. Is it impossible? No. But it would be very unlike alligator behavior to do that. Mike was also 5'10", 170 pounds, and they speculated that they would not have just devoured this man and completely, like, every piece of him. There would be something left behind that would have surfaced, like I said earlier, but nothing came up. And then they looked into the waders that were discovered floating in the surface. The odd thing is that these waders never seemed to be, they didn't seem to be damaged. There was no water damage. There was no sun damage. There was no, they weren't affected by the elements whatsoever. Almost as if they had just been placed in the water shortly before they were found. Again, this was 6.5 to 7 months down the road after he disappeared. Also suspicious was his jacket. Yeah, it had some like debris kind of inside. It got tangled up, but the jacket was also in really new looking condition. And then the flashlight, which again would have been down there for 6.5, 7 months, was fully operational. It turned on for them right away. I don't think a battery powered flashlight underwater for 7 months is going to click back on. And the other thing is that all of Mike's hunting partners said Mike never put on his waders until he was just about to get into the shallow water to start hunting, because it is dangerous. He knows of the safety issues that if he's in deep waters and the waders fill up with water, that could sink him. So they knew he never did that. So there's no way Mike would have been wearing his waders as he was already in the boat. He would have put them on just before he got in the water. So in 2006, literally every person working on this case, everyone in the sheriff's department, everyone in the wildlife commission, at this point they think, okay, Mike did not accidentally die. We can say with almost certainty that there was foul play. We didn't say that back in 2000, but at this point, yeah, Mike was probably murdered because nothing is adding up. They even said Mike didn't even die at Lake Seminole. He had to have been killed somewhere else, and they put him somewhere else. But because this was not treated as a criminal investigation from the get-go, because they did not get a warrant to thoroughly search the truck, the boat, they gave his vehicle and boat back to his family. They basically trampled all over the mud by his car. They trampled all over the shorelines of where they were beginning to search. So foot impressions, shoe impressions, all of that was out of the water. All of that was gone. There was nothing. Evidence really wasn't collected because, again, this wasn't a criminal investigation. Witness statements and testimonies were really not there. They botched it. They screwed it up. They treated this simply as a search and rescue from the beginning. And because of that, they didn't have anything to go further with now, other than their speculation. And that wasn't going to be enough. In 2007, they had no choice. They screwed up. They had to close the investigation. And that's exactly what they did. And Mike's killer got away with it. Or did they? In October of 2007, Mike's brother Nick found a picture of an old a gun that his dad had inherited to Mike. Because Mike and Nick's dad had passed away roughly a year before Mike disappeared. And it was a .22 caliber Ruger pistol. And so basically when everything was all said and done, everything was given back to Mike's family, to Nick, to his mom. The only thing not given back to them was this one .22 caliber pistol. They never thought much of it because they forgot it even existed. But where was it? Where was this gun? Why wasn't it given back? But the case is closed, so oh well. Unless... Okay. The authorities managed to convince ATF to go out to Denise and Brian's home and question them about this gun to see if they could retrieve it and get it back to the family. A couple days after that, Denise's lawyers had been given the gun by Denise, and the gun was then delivered to authorities, which then they had processed that gun for all and every evidence. But at this point, they never released any of the findings of what they may have collected from that gun. And then shortly after that, Brian and Denise finally spoke to media. This was 7 years after the whole thing happened, and they never spoke to media, but now they do. They told media, and I quote, "Nobody wants Mike found more than us." Okay. Well, they screwed up the criminal investigation, but maybe they can go a different route. So in 2008, they had the Division of Insurance Fraud get involved so that they could investigate the life insurance policy aspects of this whole thing, see if anything can come of that, criminally speaking. But everything about it was actually done squeaky clean in terms of how these things officially work. Everything was done by the book. So again, there was nothing in the financial investigation that they could say something criminal happened, unfortunately. Mike's mom, by the way, Cheryl, she was a trooper. She was a fighter. She never let this go. She knew something that happened to her son, something bad. And she was not going to let the authorities just stop. And at this point, authorities agree with her. We know, ma'am, we know your son was very likely murdered, but we don't have anything to point to anyone. And the case was closed. So there was nothing they could do anyway. Or was it over? So stay tuned and like this video for part 2, and maybe I will come back with a conclusion. Just kidding, I'm not one of those people. Let's fast forward to 2012. Brian Winchester, at this point, still married to Denise. Well, apparently he has become a sex addict and is sleeping around. So Denise says, "We're separating. We're done. Me and you, we're done. I'm not dealing with this anymore. Goodbye." And then in 2015, Denise officially files for divorce. And Brian says, no. But it didn't matter what he said or thought. He was basically forced to go forward with the divorce. At this point, Brian is he's just a hot mess. He's all over the place. On the morning of August 5th, 2016, Denise got into her car and she was driving on her way to work. She got on her cell phone, she was talking to her sister, when all of a sudden, in the back of her car, she sees a man sit up right behind her. She sees it in the mirror. It's Brian. Brian snuck into her car and scared the living shit out of her. Brian would slap the phone out of her hand and he grabbed it and then he pointed a gun at Denise. Brian was pissed that Denise left him and that Denise left him on red, basically, and did not respond to anything he ever sent to her. She just ignored him. So he was angry. So he decided the best thing to do was to kidnap her. He was like screaming at her, like, "You're going to go this place, turn here, turn there, with a gun pointed to her. And she was like, "No, fuck it." And then she like turned into a parking lot of a CVS and she pulled the car right up to the front door where like people could see and there were cameras and everything. And you know, Brian still had a gun pointed at her head. So he right then and there told Denise, like, "I'm upset that you want to divorce me. I'm upset you won't respond to any of my texts or calls." And he said he planned to shoot himself that day and end his life. But Denise managed to calm him down to the point where he lowered his gun, and she actually drove him back to where he had parked his car. Now, he told Denise, like, "I have no plans to hurt you. I had no plans to kill you. I just wanted to talk before I, ended my own life." So, but then when he gets out of the car, he like opens up the trunk, and this is awkward because he said he wasn't going to hurt her, but he pulls out a full-ass murder kit, like tarps, weapons, shovels and things, and like brings it to his car, and then like puts it into his trunk, and he's like, okay, bye. She tells him, I'm not going to police, don't worry about it. But then she peels out and goes straight to police. Brian was then quickly apprehended, and he was charged with kidnapping, amongst other smaller charges. And he would end up going to trial for it, and he actually got a 20-year prison sentence for all of it. When, at some point during this trial, I guess a friend of Brian would go to police and say that Brian said this to them. He said, I was afraid that Denise would divorce me and that she would then go to police and tell them about some guy who was killed like 10, 15 years ago. Oh boy, okay. October 18th, 2017. We are now almost 17 years after Mike Williams had disappeared and left without a trace. Mike Williams' body was found. He was found buried under 6 feet of muck and mud and like debris, buried pretty solidly deep in this pile. He still had on all of his clothes. He had on cold weather gloves, is what they called them. He also had on these these booties over his feet and shoes. I'm not sure what that is, but he had those on. But he was apparently dressed to just sort of go out for the day and not so much dressed to go duck hunting. So I guess police were working off tips that they got that possibly his body may be off of Gardner Road, and this would be in Leon County. Over the course of 5 days, they used over 30 individuals, plus they used a whole bunch of cadaver dogs, and they were digging and excavating, and it was a huge process. And then the day they planned to stop and call it off just so happened to be the day they also finally found his body. When they found it initially, they did not release to the public what his cause of death was, but they did confirm that his manner of death was 100% homicide. His body was decomposed, but with DNA and everything, they were able to confirm 100% that it was the remains of Jerry Michael Williams. Then, on May 8th, 2018, authorities would basically surprise everyone by arresting Denise Williams at her job, and they carried her out in handcuffs. They announced that she was being charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and accessory after the fact. A couple of days later, a few more bits of information were released when the arrest warrant was shown to the public. Turns out, Denise and Brian had actually started an affair back in 1997. And this was just an ongoing affair. Then, in early 2000, Denise decided that she did not want to be with Mike anymore. But she knew she had religious family that said, well, divorce is bad. We can't have that stain on our family. And also, she wouldn't want to have shared custody of their daughter. She wanted full custody of their daughter. So I guess she came to the conclusion, well, murder's the only answer. So in 2000, her and Brian began the talks on how do we get rid of Mike? What do we do? They actually had planned this for about 10 months, and then in December of 2016, they finally put their plan into action, which they started first by setting up the life insurance policy and then the murder. Oh, by the way, Brian, I can't find out if he was actually married at the time or was freshly out of a divorce or seeing someone, but he had a woman in his life and they had kids. And so Denise was like, well, we'll just kill her too, right? We'll just double whammy it, right? But then Brian was like, no, I'm not going to kill the mother of my children, but we will kill the father of yours. So, great. Who the hell are these people to just talk so flippantly about murder? I don't understand the mentality that people have. So, Brian would end up cooperating with police, and he gave them a full, very lengthy statement. And he confessed that he was the one to kill Mike. And this is what he said happened. The morning of December 16th, 2000, Denise had instructed Brian to basically take Mike out to the lake and dispose of him. Do something to make him drown. She said, make sure he puts his waders on and then push him in the water. And Brian said that's exactly what he did. He convinced Mike to go out duck hunting with him. And Mike was like, okay, cool. Yeah, I would love to do this. Totally oblivious to all of this. He had no idea an affair was going on. He loved his wife. He was, he absolutely, his best friend was Brian. And so he was just so trusting of all of it. So he put on his waders, and then Brian, I guess, then pushed him in the water. But what happened then was that Mike was able to sort of swim over to a log, and he caught onto it. And so that is when Brian took out the .22 caliber pistol that belonged to Mike, that was inherited to him by his deceased father, and he then put a bullet into Mike's face, right into his head, and he died. He then collected Mike's body and then brought him to a different location where he would end up burying him, so eventually where he was found. But then they needed a way to declare Mike legally dead without anyone finding his body. So many months later is when they decided to throw a pair of waders in the water and Mike's jacket with his hunting license and a flashlight and everything. They threw it all in the water to basically indicate that, okay, Mike was dead. So that's how they were able to collect life insurance money and all that. So that's why the waders and the jacket all looked to be in relatively pristine condition still. Now, insanely enough, even though Brian fully admitted to pulling the trigger and shooting Mike directly in the head, causing his death, he was not charged with anything. He was still already serving a prison sentence for kidnapping and all that. So they basically would use Brian to fully testify against Denise. And he was like more than happy to do that because at this point, he hates her. Denise's trial would begin in September of 2018, and she would end up being convicted of all of her charges. And she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. And now Mike and Denise's daughter has no parents. Both of her parents are now gone forever. So do they ever think about this shit? No, they don't. Obviously they don't. The daughter was then awarded all of Mike's remaining assets, and whatever insurance money was left, which there was some, was all awarded to the daughter, who was a teenager at this point. In a January 2020 appeal from Denise and her attorney, they would come to the courts and say there is no physical evidence to show or prove that Denise was directly involved with the physical act of murder, which the courts would agree that she did not participate in the actual murder itself. So her murder conviction was overturned, but the other convictions were not. The conspiracy to commit murder and the accessory after the fact were still in place. So her sentence was reduced. She would get 30 years in prison. So she will at least be in jail for quite a long time. She will be an old lady, basically, when she is let out. Oh, I love these people who think that divorce is a worse option than murder. That murder must be the better choice. It almost never is. You're almost always caught. So, just fucking divorce. Jesus. But at any rate, that is the end of this case. This was a lengthy one, it looks like, so I hope you guys stuck around for it. If you want to see significantly shorter true crime cases from me, you can hop on over to my TikTok account where I have about 2.7 million followers and well over 2,000 videos of 3-minute murder stories, basically. So yeah, hop on over there, give me a follow, and I always post over there as well. I post here 3 days a week, so there's plenty of content from me coming from both. If you have a case you want to recommend, please send me an email to mikey@truecrimerer.com. Check my case list below before you send me a name to make sure the name isn't already on there. just search the list by hitting Control F on your computer or the 3 dots on your phone, and then hit find and replace. Type the name. If you don't see it, then send me the name, location, and when it happened, and I can add it to my list. Please be patient. It takes me a while to get through all the emails, and then also be patient with when it comes to covering the case. It could be a very long time because I pick cases at random. And finally, if you would like to support me in any way, we do sell some merch. Merch is also in the link tree in my description below where the case list is. And we have shirts and hoodies and mugs and a wine glass and other things like that. So plenty of cool things. We're in the process of like revamping the designs as well. So when that happens, I'll let you guys know. But right now, everything is still on there to be purchased. And he will ship internationally. So yay. All right. That is it for this video. So until the next case, true crimerers.